Welcome back. Welcome back. You are on WYTV7 and you have reached In the Gap. We are your hosts, Keith and Dorothy Smith, and we're glad to have you this episode. In this episode here, we're going to do a follow-up from our previous episode. You remember the first one was how we met online, and we did a part 2 to that as well. Part 1 was her side of the story. Part 2 was mine. And last week, our episode 3, with both of us together on, it was about the happily ever after. It comes with challenges. And we talked about some of the challenges that we faced from being middle-aged, starting our lives over again, getting in the dating pool, having to use social media dating or online dating. And also, too, the fact that we were seeking someone outside of our own race because that was our preference. So being an interracial couple was an obstacle as well, because it was new for me and it was new for her as well. And we just went through some of the challenges that we faced. And just to kind of piggyback off of it, I guess you could call this part 2. We're going to be staying with some of the challenges that we faced and challenges that you guys might have faced. And we just want to welcome you into the broadcast. And if you're in the podcast listening audience, we want to welcome you in now too, and kind of just to catch you up. That should get you up to speed if you have not looked at the previous episodes. But if you have not, please go back and listen and watch those episodes, because God revealed a lot of things between us. And we gave those things to you guys on those episodes. So building off of the challenges that we talked about last week, some of the things from like our cultural differences, what was some of the challenges you remember that we talked about?
As far as for me, it was actually not so much a cultural difference. It was just more or less coming from singleness and being a single parent for so long, and then having to consult with you for decision making. So that was one of my
and it was just like from being the sole person making the decision. And it, in a sense, it's more like a power shift that you're having to give some of it up after, and not only just a power shift, but it's the fact that you got to trust the other person. In which you're giving some of these decisions too. And that goes back to our earlier episodes as well, when we said in our profiles, we were very upfront and honest. And we talked about if you have a past, to give that to a person quickly.
Absolutely.
And let them decide whether they want to be a part of this or not. That way, before emotions get involved, feelings, you don't want to spring that up after a couple of months. Tell them, that's what we did. We talked about it openly. Immediately, she recognized that something for a man to spend that much time with God, that maybe I'd been incarcerated. And we talked about it. And it's something we're going to touch on again tonight as well, because it's about meeting people where they're at. And that's something we're talking about last episode. But we've got some feedback off of our previous episodes, and we want to continuously ask you guys to please let us know what you're getting out of this. It helps us to help you. You can reach us at itgmotivational at gmail.com. Send us an email. Let us know. And we've got some feedback off of these recent videos, and it's been great. But one of the things that was told to us was it gave revelation to her that she has requirements such as we did, but it's also too to go into these requirements with an open mind, not saying I'll never do this or I'll never do that. It's to have an open mind, because you never know what God may want for you.
Right, and that's a good point, because as I had said on our previous episode, I was one who not in a million years would have considered dating someone who had been incarcerated, because again, we have our expectations, we have our list that we want to fulfill, and someone who was incarcerated just simply wasn't wasn't on the list, should I say.
Wasn't in the cards.
It wasn't.
Yeah. Wasn't in the cards.
But, the beauty of it is, it's just once I was, once recognizing that you were a man of God, and when God is in control, it doesn't matter what we think or how we think or whatever the case may be. When God is in the mix, you guys, all of that will fall by the wayside. The shoulda, coulda, wouldas, I'm not going to, I'll never, and never say never. Never say never.
And you just did an outstanding job transitioning into our point, because you said when God is in the mix. And I want you to remember that, because what we're going to talk about now, we're going to Bible base this as well. It's going to be about relationship, but we're going to use some Bible foundation to prove the fact that when God's in the mix, you can meet people where they're at, and you can step outside your own situation to meet them there. Because the biggest thing is when you have to meet someone where they're at, there might be at a place that you're not comfortable in.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's going to take more from one than it is to the other to meet there. Like, she had to meet me where I was at, because I was just coming home, trying to get acclimated back to society, getting a career, trying to rebuild myself. So I would be what you would call an attractive prospect to find the person who God had for me. Well, God didn't let me get not one thing completed before that. I mean, I'm serious. She had to meet me where I was at. But it wasn't me she was meeting. It was the God in me she recognized.
Absolutely.
And we've kind of looked over Acts 16, because it's kind of been dwelling in my spirit some. And we both got a different revelation from it today. And we're going to share that with you. But we're going to be using Acts chapter 16, starting at verse 16, to kind of give foundation for what it means to meet someone where they're at. Mm-hmm. But Paul and Silas is going to give us a greater picture than we can understand, because picking up at verse 16, Paul and Silas have been traveling through, preaching the word of God, healing, saving, and there was a young lady who was following Paul and Silas, and she kept shouting, "These men are teaching or preaching to you how to be saved." And she kept doing this for days and days and days, and it became annoying to Paul. Go ahead.
The Bible stated that it was a spirit that she had upon her, and this spirit within this girl followed them. Mm-hmm. It kept following them day after day within their travels. And during the time that she was with them, she was constantly, shouting out, who they were. I don't know if she was mocking them, the spirit was mocking them, or what have you. But nonetheless, this spirit, it was like a nagging. It was a nag, because Paul had pretty much gotten kind of irritated at her very presence. And actually, do you want me to continue, honey?
Well, just one point, because you kind of beat me to the point where you brought that up, but that's fine. We're where we need to be at. But Paul, he put up with it for some days.
Yes, he did.
And I think he did that because he recognized who he was in Christ and knew that this spirit had no hold over him. So he kept on doing what he was supposed to be doing, the task at hand.
Yes.
And when she grew annoying, you pick it up from there.
Well, we're relating this to relationship, and that's a good point when you said that he kept about his business, because I can remember prior to even doing my profile, I had already made a declaration that beginning that next year, I was going to do some things differently. My focus was going to be me and my children. We were going to do some things differently, so that's good. I didn't even see that. But she had become very annoying to Paul, and Paul was at wit's end. And this spirit, again, was taunting. It was a taunting spirit. It was a mocking spirit. And this spirit got to the point where Paul was like, "Look, I've had it," and cast that spirit out of her. He spoke it into existence for that spirit to leave her. And that spirit left, not weeks later, days later, months later, or years later. Yes. It left immediately and suddenly. And that's one of the things that Keith and I also kind of have captured on as far as our relationship, how God moves immediately and suddenly and now in your lives. And the fact that one of the things that I got out of it is the fact that Paul had that type of authority, the type of power to where he commanded that thing and it had to listen and it did exactly what he spoke. So that's another thing that we spoke on, is having that relationship, that intimate relationship with God, to speak certain things into existence in our lives, be it, speaking over our lives, over the things that we're believing God for, and just really having that authority and having that relationship and having, being filled with the Holy Spirit. So that's key.
Well, and also too, and that's a great point, because now I want you to take what we just spoke about this young lady with this nagging spirit behind Paul, shouting and trying to torment them. And I want you to think about the relationship that you're in, the relationship you're beginning. I want you to think about times where there's been an annoying spirit in this relationship, because we're going to relate this to relationship. I can remember early on in our relationship, we had an annoying, nagging spirit that tried to attack us every single Sunday. Every Sunday. It was going to end in an argument, a disagreement. I'm not talking you for the rest of the day type attitude.
Right.
And then it seemed like on Monday we were fine. But every Sunday, and that's a day we set apart for God.
Absolutely.
A day of rest. This spirit would attack. But when we started recognizing this spirit and what it was supposed to do,
what it was trying to do,
what it was designed to do, and we started doing like Paul was doing. We just started walking ahead of it, not paying any attention. Now, we didn't turn and cast it out immediately like Paul did. But after a while, I guess this spirit recognized I can't create confusion on Sunday anymore. And now it's got, when we see Sundays, we don't see it as better watch out. You know what happens on Sunday. Now we're moved on in our relationship, and not only our relationship, but our relationship with Christ, to be able to recognize these things. But let's move on in the story.
Okay.
And Paul cast this spirit out, but this spirit made a lot of money fortune telling for some high ranking authority in that town. And when they found out this spirit was no longer in it, they couldn't profit from it. Now think about people in your relationship that can't profit from you anymore, from getting your attention, because now it's going to someone else.
That's good.
And I want you to relay that into this story.
That's good. And that, it's amazing that you brought that out. It actually kind of goes with one of the things I stated in our last broadcast as well, is that God is not going to allow us to be used or misused.
Exactly.
So that's very key. I like that.
Good. That's a great point. And God will not allow it. But what these men tried to do is they tried to create havoc upon Paul and Silas, because now they're mad because they can't profit from this young lady anymore. Because all Paul did was use the authority that was in him, the God that was in him, the same God that she seen in me when I had nothing to offer.
And actually, that's how it is oftentimes in relationships as well. When a person realizes they can't use you anymore, they lash out at you. They'll say everything that they've been wanting to say, or wouldn't normally say if you were doing or adhering to what it is that they wanted you to adhere to. It's like there's a switch when you shut something down, or a person down who's been taking advantage of you or trying to take advantage of you or misuse you in any form or fashion.
Yeah.
So I find that to be interesting.
And another point I'm going to bring out that just came to me. I've actually seen her list that she had prepared before meeting me. And her list was very different than what I brought to the table. I didn't see anything on that list about, Lord, I want to get a man who's learned how to serve you in prison. Or, Lord, I want a man who don't have his own home and having to stay with a friend. I want a man who don't have a job. None of that. But that's what she got in me. I was unemployed. I was living with a friend who showed kindness to me, my best friend my whole life. And I was trying to get myself in a position to be the person for that other person. But like I said, God didn't let me complete anything. And that's how God does it sometimes. So he can let you know, I'm in this situation. It's not what you're preparing. It's what I've already prepared for you years ago when she seen that commercial about heart ethics.
Yes.
Or when I met Pastor Shane, him preaching to me in prison, and he ended up being my mentor. We ended up moving to Columbia. Bam, I'm here with her, connected back to Pastor Shane, heart ethics. God had already did that.
But had you not been incarcerated back in 2010?
No,
2009?
2008.
2008. Had
Yes.
you not been incarcerated, you would have never met Pastor Shane.
Yes.
And then you and I certainly
exactly
would have had that connection.
And let's say this too. I was better in my life when I met her. I was not at the place I wanted to be, but I was better than the place that I had just came from.
Oh, wow. That's good.
So we're going to pick this up because Paul and Silas were beaten and they were cast into prison because these men had influence over the government. And when they were cast into prison, they weren't just cast into prison.
And the men that we're speaking of are the men that the young lady who was a fortune teller, who she, her owners, who she worked for, since she was no longer profitable or could make a profit. That is who we're speaking of.
So basically, when you're of no use to anyone else, a lot of times you're cast aside. You're put in a place to be forgotten. And all that hurt that you're going to go through is going with you to that place. And that's what I see in Paul and Silas. They were beaten, and they were cast into prison. The Bible says they weren't just cast into prison. And back where the prison that they were in, it was like the cells were like honed out in a circle in the cave. Right. And each cell was in the wall of the cave. But the inner prison is where they were at. Now, in today's incarceration, that would be called lockup. It's like you're already in prison, but you can go to jail inside of prison. You go to lockup. Well, for Paul and Silas, this was the worst place you could be because it's totally dark in there. Paul was already weak in his eyes, and now they got stocks over their leg. They can't even move. At least in my physical incarceration, I can move around. I can move around the cell. I could read a book. I had a light switch I could turn off and on. They didn't have this. So their situation was probably one of the worst they've ever been in. Not just them, but all the other prisoners that were around. But the Bible says at midnight, Paul and Silas began to sing praise and hymns to God so the other inmates or the other prisoners could hear.
Actually, I was going to go back to when you were speaking of the design of the prison, and you said that they were, in one of the worst places. I think that's one of the things you stated. But when you're speaking of the design of the prison and you're saying they're in prison, think about it oftentimes when relationships end, maybe not, not any fault of our own or what have you, our minds become imprisoned. We start thinking, hey, maybe I wasn't good enough. Maybe I could have done that better. So we become imprisoned with our thoughts as well. Not only you're speaking of a physical prison for Paul and Silas, but from a relationship standpoint, it could be imprisonment in our minds.
Exactly. So let's say Paul and Silas singing these hymns at midnight to these other prisoners who was in the worst situation of their life as well. Paul and Silas are stepping outside of their situation to honor God. No matter how bad it is for us, my concern is for those around me. Yeah. When I say you're in a relationship and you're no good to anyone, you can't profit to that other person anymore, or that friend who's always counted on you, but now you got a significant other. Guess what? Sometimes they want to push you away. But Paul and Silas are saying, don't forget about them. Step outside of your situation to continue to pray and show the God in you to them. And that's what Paul and Silas did to these prisoners. And it said that God brought forth an earthquake that shook the foundation so hard that the doors fell off and the chains fell off. When we do this, whatever chains or whatever's binding this relationship, God will cause it to fall off. And that's when you can start to meet people where they're at, because it takes God to be able to do that.
Absolutely.
And here's something else I find very interesting. He said the jailer was going to commit suicide and fall on his own soul. And Paul said, don't do it, for we're all here. Now, Paul's dimming his eyes. It's dark in this place, because in the next verse, the jailer says, bring me light so I can see.
And the reason why he was going to fall on his own sword is because it was his responsibility to keep everyone within the confines of the prison. And with this earthquake and the chains being broken, he was sure that the prisoners had left.
But Paul knew no one had left. It was total dark, and he's already dimming his eyes. But that's because when God's in the situation, you can see more through your spirit than you can with your eyes. Because it may not look like a good situation that you're about to get into, formerly incarcerated. No job, no money, no anything. But what you've seen in the spirit was the God in the situation. That's what Paul and Silas did.
Absolutely.
And here's the other thing. You ever wonder why none of them ever left if they was in the worst situation of their life? And maybe it is because the power of God was so strong in that one place that they said, I would rather stay in this place in my life and be this close to God than to move on anywhere else. Wow. When God has that person for you, it may not be the ideal situation. And I'm going to tell you now, I'm guilty, because I've told people that's asked for advice. I've said, get out of that situation, brother. Sister, you got to leave this situation. And God has shown me where I've been wrong. Instead of telling people to leave that situation, what we need to do is inject God into that situation.
Right.
The same way he's injected into this relationship. And we've overcome challenges and obstacles.
Now, we're in no way, shape, form, or fashion advocating for physical abuse.
No.
So,
but there are certain situations that are not comfortable for you that you say, you know what, I'm too old for this. I'm not going to put up with this. It's time for me to go. Don't leave that situation. If you've seen God in that situation initially, it's the same God in there when it's going wrong for you that you've seen initially when he's there. Inject God into that situation. Keep him there and watch the foundation shake, the doors fall off, and the chains fall off. To complete the story real quick, the jailer carried them home, cleaned the sores and the wounds that they had on. The jailer's whole family was baptized and saved. He fed Paul and Silas. The situation worked out great in the end for the glory of God. When you have to meet someone in the place that they're in, the glory of God will shine through, not only for you, but for that person. And then you can go on to live the purpose that God has planned for both of you many years ago. So don't be scared to take that chance. Don't be scared to take 5 and 6 off of your list because it didn't match up. Meet people where they're at if you see the God in it. Anything in closing?
No, not at all. You really summed it up well, honey.
One more thing before we go. To see God in this situation, how do we do it?
You have to have a relationship, an intimate relationship with him.
Relationship with God. 1 John 1:9, I say it every broadcast. If you confess your sins to God, he is quick and just to forgive you of sins and cleanse you from all unrighteousness. If you have not done that, if you're still seeking that relationship with God, that you can look outside of your circumstance, that you can go meet people where they're at because you see the God in the situation. If you want that relationship, or even if you've had it before and you just don't feel like it's strong right now and you want to rededicate that, say this prayer. Just say, Lord, forgive me of my sin. Cleanse me from all unrighteousness. My wife said it again tonight. God does it immediately. Spirit leaves immediately. When we do that, God's already in the situation. It doesn't take a long, drawn-out prayer. It just takes sincerity and a pure heart. And God knows it. And something else that it will take, too. It will take you to help others who has been in that situation or others who are trying to move past their situation. And the reason that we're able to bring our stories and our experiences to help others is WYTV7.
Yes, yes.
And guess what? They need your help too. We need your help so we can continue bringing these broadcasts. Go to WYTV7.org. They have a donate button. Click that donate button. Any amount will be greatly appreciated. Anything you can do for us to continue to help move the ministry forward for Jesus Christ. Click that donate button today. Let Jesus know, hey, I'm a part of this ministry too. I want to help. This is how you can help. And not only for our broadcast, but for all the broadcasters who are doing an amazing job, and new people are coming on board. And we're just thanking God for opening this ministry up. Yes. We're going into new places because of the help that you guys are providing. And not only that, we thank you for your help. We thank you for the feedback. And I thank you right now in the name of Jesus. And I ask that you continue to watch, that you continue to support. And hey, look us up. Give them the website.
Share. Our website is inthegapmotivational.com. And our email address is itgmotivational@gmail.com.
Anything in closing?
No.
I know someone tonight was helped. And I know someone tonight dedicated their life to Jesus Christ. And we're so happy for you. Let us hear about it. And we can talk about it next time on In the Gap. But until then, we're standing in the gap for you. And we're going to ask that you stand in the gap for those who cannot stand for themselves. See you next time, guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.